I boarded the train just before midnight. The platform was unusually quiet, the distant hum of a broken speaker announcing destinations drowned by the oppressive fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I hadn't planned on taking the train, but my car broke down miles away, and I had no other option. I was alone and I was tired. When the train's doors closed behind me, a sense of dread washed over me. Inside, the train was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering sporadically. I noticed that the car was nearly empty except for a few scattered passengers, all looking exhausted or lost in thought. A sudden jolt and the train lurched forward, disappearing into the night. I found a seat near the middle, right next to the window, and settled in. I told myself it was just another ordinary train ride. But then I noticed something odd. The passengers weren't moving. I tried not to panic. Maybe they were just asleep. I glanced around, looking for any sign of life. The woman 2 rows ahead had her eyes wide open, staring blankly ahead, unmoving. Across the aisle, a man sat rigidly, his hands resting in his lap, his face pale and expressionless. My stomach churned. I turned to see if anyone else had noticed this eerie stillness, but there was no one looking back. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. Typical. I decided to stand up and get a closer look at the passengers. As I approached the woman, I realized she wasn't breathing. My heart pounded in my chest. I touched her shoulder gently, and her head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath quickened as I watched her lifeless eyes blink, slowly, deliberately, as if she had just woken up from a deep sleep. Then she spoke. "They took everything from me," she whispered, her voice raspy and low, barely audible over the rattling of the train. "Who?" I asked, my voice trembling. But before she could answer, the train's lights flickered again and went out, plunging us into complete darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Suddenly, a soft whisper echoed through the car, but it wasn't coming from her. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. When the lights came back on, the woman was gone. I turned around, frantically searching for her, but there was no trace. Panic clawed at my chest. I needed to find a conductor or someone who could explain what was happening. I hurried down the aisle toward the next car, but as I reached the door, it refused to open. I pulled harder, but it was like it had been welded shut. The whispers grew louder, almost rhythmic. My eyes darted around, and I noticed the other passengers were now standing, facing me. Their expressions were blank, their eyes hollow. And then they all started whispering in unison, "You shouldn't have boarded." My heart raced as I backed away from the growing crowd of whispering passengers. Every door I tried was locked, trapping me in this nightmare. The whispers grew more intense, now blending with a faint, mechanical hum that seemed to come from deep within the train's walls. My breath hitched and I felt sweat trickling down my spine. I made my way toward the back of the car, hoping to find some sort of emergency exit. But as I reached the end, a strange odor hit me, a foul metallic scent that made my stomach turn. I turned to see one of the passengers holding a piece of broken glass, staring at me with that same empty expression. The man with the glass moved closer, his eyes locked onto mine, and I could see his lips moving, though I couldn't hear what he was saying over the whispers. I tried to stay calm, but my body was screaming at me to run. I glanced around, looking for a weapon or anything to defend myself. Suddenly, he lunged at me and I dodged just in time, his body slamming into the seat behind me. I could see the glint of the glass as he swung again, narrowly missing my face. Desperation kicked in and I grabbed a metal pole, swinging it hard. The impact sent him sprawling to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, and for a moment, everything was still. I couldn't stay there. I ran toward the front of the train, my only thought to reach the conductor's cabin. As I sprinted through the cars, I passed more passengers. Some sitting motionless, others standing, staring at me with those vacant eyes. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the door ahead. When I finally reached it, I pounded on it, praying for someone to answer. The door creaked open slightly, revealing a dimly lit cabin. I stepped inside cautiously, and that's when I saw him. The conductor, slumped over the controls, his throat slit open. The smell of iron filled the air. In his hand, he clutched an old, worn ticket, stained with blood. I pried it from his stiff fingers, my hands shaking. It wasn't an ordinary ticket. It had strange symbols on it, symbols I couldn't recognize. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind swept through the cabin, blowing the ticket out of my hand and into the darkness of the train car. I turned to follow it, but as I stepped back into the car, the passengers were gone. The whispers, however, were growing louder, now almost like chanting. I knew I had to find that ticket. It felt important, like a key to understanding this madness. As I moved down the aisle, the train car began to change. The walls seemed to stretch, and the windows flickered with images of dark forests and desolate fields. Shadows twisted and contorted along the seats, growing taller, their forms becoming almost human-like. My eyes were drawn to the floor, where the shadows seemed to converge, pulling toward a small dark spot that was rapidly expanding. I didn't know where to go. I was trapped in this shifting reality. I looked back, and the door to the conductor's cabin had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall. Panic gripped me as I realized I was completely alone, or so I thought. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned to the window, and there, amidst the flickering images, was a face. It was pale and gaunt, with eyes as black as night. It stared right at me, unblinking. My heart pounded, and I took a step back, trying to keep my breathing steady. The face pressed closer to the glass, its mouth opening in a wide, unnatural grin. I could hear its voice now, whispering softly through the glass, "You shouldn't have boarded, you shouldn't have come." The train suddenly screeched to a halt, throwing me against the seats. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin as the lights flickered, casting erratic shadows. I looked back at the window, but the face was gone. The train was now dead silent. Even the whispers had stopped. I needed to find the ticket, the one with the strange symbols. Somehow, I knew it was my only way out. I searched frantically, lifting seats and peering under them. The train felt colder now, and I could see my breath in the air. Then, I saw it. The ticket was lying by the feet of a child, a little girl with long dark hair. I approached cautiously. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands clutching a stuffed bear. "Can I have that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She slowly lifted her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were deep, hollow, and filled with a void that sent chills down my spine. She held out the ticket, but as I reached for it, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Her lips parted and she whispered, "They won't let you leave. Not without him." Before I could ask who he was, she released me and the ticket fell to the floor. I grabbed it and ran, the sound of her giggling echoing behind me. The symbols on the ticket were glowing now, pulsing like a heartbeat. I didn't understand what they meant, but I could feel a strange energy emanating from it. I looked around, realizing the train was moving again, but this time the scenery outside the windows was nothing I recognized, endless dark fields and twisted trees. I needed answers. I decided to head back, retracing my steps to the car where the passengers first appeared. But as I passed through the cars, they were empty. Then I saw him, a man in a dark coat sitting at the far end of the car. He hadn't been there before. "Who are you?" I demanded, holding up the ticket as if it could protect me. He turned slowly, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You shouldn't have boarded this train," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "This is the train of lost souls. Those who step on it never step off." "I want off. Now," I shouted. He chuckled softly, a sound that sent a shiver through my bones. "The only way off is through him," he replied, pointing down the aisle. I turned to look and saw nothing but darkness at the end of the car. When I looked back, the man was gone. The darkness at the end of the car seemed to pulse and shift like a living thing. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers had returned, but now they were louder, echoing all around me. I clutched the ticket tightly and moved forward, feeling like I was walking through water. My limbs felt heavy, my breath shallow. As I got closer, I saw something moving within the darkness. A tall, shadowy figure with no face, just a mass of swirling black mist. It reached out toward me with long, skeletal fingers. I felt a tugging sensation like it was pulling at my very soul. I stumbled back, but the dark entity advanced, its presence overwhelming. I could feel it trying to pull me in, to consume me. My hands began to tremble, and the ticket slipped from my grasp. As soon as it hit the floor, a blinding light erupted from it, momentarily pushing the darkness back. The entity let out a horrible, otherworldly scream, retreating into the shadows. I picked up the ticket again, realizing it was more powerful than I thought. I didn't know what it was, but it seemed to be the only thing keeping me safe. I ran back to the next car, trying to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. As I entered, I saw an old woman sitting alone, knitting. Her eyes met mine, and she gestured for me to sit. I hesitated, but something in her gaze felt human. "You have the ticket, don't you?" she asked, her voice a mix of sorrow and urgency. It's not yours. It's his. Whose? I asked, my voice shaking. The conductor of souls. He comes for those who don't belong. The ticket binds you to him, unless you break the curse. Break the curse? How? I asked, desperate for a way out. She smiled sadly. You must return the ticket to its rightful owner. But the journey won't be easy. Many have tried, none have succeeded. I didn't have time to ask what she meant. The lights flickered again and the temperature dropped sharply. The whispers became deafening. He's coming, she warned. You must hurry. Before I could react, the train lurched violently, throwing me off my seat. When I looked up, the old woman was gone, and the darkness was closing in again. With the ticket clutched in my hand, I ran. The train seemed to stretch endlessly now, every car blending into the next. I could feel him, the conductor, getting closer. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of lost souls crying out. I knew I was nearing the end. I had to face him. I stopped, turned around, and there he was, standing just a few feet away. His form was clearer now, a tall, imposing figure in a dark coat, his face hidden in shadow. You have something of mine, he said, his voice echoing with 1,000 voices. I held up the ticket, my hand shaking. Take it, I said. Just let me go. He extended his hand and the ticket began to glow brighter, its symbols burning like fire. The light grew until it was blinding. I felt a force pulling me backward, a rush of cold air surrounding me, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the empty platform, the train nowhere in sight. I looked around, dazed, my heart still racing. In my hand I held a plain, blank ticket. The whispers were gone, but I knew deep down that some journeys never truly end.